When the public health crisis eventually subsides, the old structural socio-economic problems will, of course, still be there. They'll be felt more acutely in the aftermath of Covid-19 and the coronavirus hurricane, I think, is beyond doubt. So what should South Africa be doing to prepare for this new normal after Covid-19? That's the overarching question that a new book from Jacana Media, Recession, Recovery and Reform, I've got a copy of it over here, South Africa after Covid-19 seeks to tackle. It's the 3 R's, and I think it suggests a return to the basics, to get things right in the beleaguered and some say the buggered and the beloved country. It's edited by prominent economist Raymond Parsons. The book comprises a fascinating collection of essays by some of South Africa's top intellectuals and thought leaders. And we're joined now by Parsons, as well as essayists Lumkile Mondi, senior lecturer at the School of Economics and Business Sciences at Wits, Lukhanya Mnyanda, who's been the editor of Business Day, one of the country's leading daily newspapers since 2018, and Bernstein, Executive Director for the Centre for Development and Enterprise. Raymond, this is your 7th book now, and we launched Good Capitalism, Bad Capitalism together a few years ago. That was all about the role of business during the apartheid years, warts and all, as well as into the future. And I think we rightly questioned then the effectiveness of bodies like NEDLAC. The increasing fragmentation of organised business was also a key theme. But some might say, not another book on South Africa's economic future. Why did you see the need for this book now?
Well, hi, Michael. Let me also first say that you speak about my book. It's really our book because it's a collection of 13 essays on various aspects of what we need to do to fix South Africa's future in the light of what we've gone through, what we're going through now, and in particular to create the pillars on which we want to build the new normal once we get past the coronavirus episode and all its trauma. And I think what these essays do is to say, look, since certainly my own book of 2 years ago and other publications, we've really fallen by the wayside as a country, both economically and politically and in many other ways. So there's a gap to be filled if we are to triumph over the coronavirus, learn the lessons, and, as I said, fix the future. So what these essays do, and the important point here is they call for action, for urgent action. They also show you across all the subjects they address that there are interdependent issues, interdependent actions and values that we need to implement and uphold. And so the basic message really is, if we want to build a bigger, stronger and better future, we're going to have to get on with it, and we're going to have to be action-orientated. I know it's a cliche, it's been said often enough. This once again is reinforced by the book. We've got to walk the talk very visibly, very evidently, so that we make a difference on the ground. The time for action is now, and that is really the overall message of this book, which has some very interesting views, some rather controversial views. But I think the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we all want 4 things. The first is we want inclusive growth, we want economic transformation, we want competitiveness, and above all, we want the leadership that will make this happen.
And I want to segue from that into your essay, because your essay deals with a jobs policy for greater inclusion, and Raymond mentions inclusive growth. But I think we throw away and we throw around terms too loosely in this country. What do we actually mean by inclusive growth when we talk about it in the South African context?
Well, you're quite right. Most people don't define the inclusive part of growth. They just sort of use it as an adjective. And we certainly would be arguing for a much more considered and serious focus on inclusion in South Africa from all parties. If you look at the recent recovery strategies from the ANC and from business, I don't think there's nearly enough about inclusion, either definition or actions that are sufficient for our purposes. So how you define inclusion, we're certainly putting an enormous emphasis on jobs and skills. people need much better education and training for jobs, particularly if you don't get a matric. Our training system is not nearly good enough, very expensive and not working well. But the real issue is jobs, and South Africa has to become a much more labor-intensive economy than we are today. That requires both an attitude and some changes to laws and regulations. We currently subsidize capital far more than we subsidize employment, and we need to change the labor market. Not holus bolus, but some carefully calibrated reforms that make it more attractive for employers to hire young people, especially with little experience. Why would you hire them unless we're changing the rules and regulations to do that, and of course, wages?
I think you touch on a few very interesting points, and we'll come back to them. But the one key that Lumkile links through to your essay on the fiscal crisis and how we got here really goes back to this change in 2007, this political change that also saw a change in approach to governance. We saw this new Keynesian mindset that we could grow our way out of the global financial crisis, counter-cyclical fiscal policies. Pravin Gordhan was the finance minister at the time. But growth there and inclusiveness was growing the public sector wage bill. Just take us back to the lessons that we can learn from the failure of radical economic transformation.
The biggest lesson that you have learned is that together, business, civil society, and the state can do far better than we've done, particularly driven by Minister Pravin Gordhan in 2010 with expansionist fiscal policy and the amendment of the Preferential Procurement Act, where white established industrialists in the deployment of infrastructure by both Transnet and Eskom was given to rent seekers in the form of black economic empowerment entrepreneurs who sought out foreigners, whether the Chinese railways or European railways, at the expense of a very strong industrial base which was built in the earlier part of the past century. Because it was white-owned, therefore it was marginalized. Hence, the low levels of economic growth, the corruption in state capture that happened, and the huge job losses as a result of state capture. So going forward, I think it's important for us to put South African business at the center of economic development and ensure that the state create the enabling environment by supporting domestic industrialists, black and white, than focusing on driving strategies which prefer black entrepreneurs when many of them don't have any experience in manufacturing.
I'm reminded of what Deng Xiaoping says: it doesn't matter the color of the cat so long as it catches the mice. And I think in this country today, as much as we like to look east for inspiration, that is critical. The Kanya, from your perspective, you obviously focus heavily on the Fourth Estate. And I think through the state capture years, while you were in Europe, the Fourth Estate certainly played a big role in shining a light on state capture through the Gupta leaks. But I want to zoom in on financial journalism, and that's really your speciality and mine as well. And you bemoan the fact that there's been a hollowing out of the newsroom. There's a juniorization of the newsroom. Budgets are being cut. And the quality of financial journalism just, it hasn't been good enough. I would go so far as to say it's as rare as hen's teeth. But the problem is, if you find a hen's tooth, you'd more likely pay up for the hen's tooth than you would for a financial journalist. And I think that's the germ of the problem we face. Why are financial journalists so important in South Africa today?
No, Michael, when we, as Raymond said in his introduction to the book, most of these essays were written before COVID actually broke up. But then, if you see what happened since, then it just highlights how relevant all these essays were. Especially the issue of information, the level of disinformation that has come out in terms of whether it's about the vaccines or whether it's about the role of the central bank. And, and now with the information, or information in inverted commas that you see on Twitter every day, that sort of passes as news, it's actually quite scary. That's why I think you need good journalism more than ever before, like, to counter the lies and the distortions. And if you read Lungila's essay, the way it takes back the history of how we got here. I mean, in all the debates about the Reserve Bank, people will you actually, if you're spending all your time on Twitter, you think the reason we're here is because the Secha Khanyago raised rates maybe a couple of times in 5 years, So I think it's been, it's actually been almost like self-explanatory by just by looking at what's been happening in the last couple of months and the need for information and the need for analysis of what's happening.
And it's certainly a case that we need corporate South Africa as well to be supporting financial journalism in an age where the mandatory long-form publications are no longer subsidizing daily business newspapers as well. Raymond, I want to come back to you on this issue of building a house of many mansions, as you call it in the book. Obviously, there are many overlaps in what some of the essays talk to about what needs to be done. What makes this time different in the South African discourse is that there is, to me, a sense that we're in last chance saloon, finally and eventually. You just have to have a look at the Bloomberg report recently that we've run out of political and economic road. Are you encouraged by where we find ourselves that this will be sufficient, provide enough pressure to lead to the kind of structural reforms that we need to see in the economy?
Well, I think, Michael, one is encouraged by the fact that, the saying that if a man is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. So I'm hoping that the crisis we're in will concentrate the minds of everyone, especially our key decision makers, on what now needs to be done, as we've tried to outline in some of the essays in the book. But just to give a perspective as to why we seem to be suffering a lot more than perhaps other countries, I use what someone like Warren Buffett said. He said, when the tide goes out, you see who has been swimming naked. That's what happened to us 6 months ago. We were already naked. And then the tide went out with the coronavirus, and we've been found to be naked because all the issues that we were discussing last year, corruption, the low growth trap, the debt trap, the whole issue of delivery, and so forth. These issues are even more prominent now because of the fact that we've been found swimming naked. And we now have to understand that the critical situation we now face can be turned around. It's not that the answers are not available. Heavens knows we have had a plethora of advisory councils, task teams, summits. All have pointed the way, not always.
Okay, I'm just going to break then. As we look for a better line to see who exactly is going to save South Africa, swimming out there naked and seemingly alone.